John Monks. Welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
Hello, Robbie.
Really lovely to have you here. Regular listeners to the podcast or long-time listeners will know a couple of friends, at least a few friends that we have in common.
Yep.
Inga Umblia, who's a colleague of yours, Mike Toller, who Mike and I and you and your company have worked together, and also Joel Monk.
Yeah.
And when we were first connected on LinkedIn, I was thinking about this morning. I looked at you and saw the mutual connections. And I don't think there were many. I think it was probably just Inga and Joel or something like that, maybe a couple of others. And I did a kind of double take because I was like, oh, maybe they're related. And of course, that doesn't make any sense because you don't have the same name. But it was enough of felt like a slightly unlikely connection for me to go, what? And so, yeah, it's lovely to have you here on the podcast and looking forward to the conversation we're going to get into.
Yeah, me too. And I think we will return to the Joel Monk, John Monks, not the same name, not related in any way, but actually an interesting connection in terms of this story of coaching. So I'm sure we will get there.
Yeah. And so maybe let's go there now, right? Often the way we start, we get into people's stories on this show is to think about when was the first time you came across coaching in the way that we would think about coaching now.
Yeah, I think that moment where I was connected to Joel, so I'll explain the connection so that you and your listeners understand. So in 2015, I attended a creative leadership course. So it's an executive leadership program, they call it now, a 6-month course with 4 weeks of taught programming at the Think School of Creative Leadership, which is based in Amsterdam. It's a global program, but it's based in Amsterdam. And the way that program works is 4 modules of taught content and then quite a lot of coaching around the edges. So it was the first time that I had been exposed to coaching as something more than just what one person did with another person, normally in support of work that they're doing. So I had trained as a coach before that point in time, but I hadn't actually practiced any coaching. And this was the first time that I saw coaching kind of deployed at scale. And Joel was one of the faculty coaches at that point. And the funny thing was that even though our names are different, I have an S, he doesn't have an S, and he's Joel and I'm John, they're not the same name. People kept mixing us up. It's like, oh, you one of the coaches? Like, I'm not. So it was quite a funny thing. And he and I chuckled about it every time we saw each other at the, in the Think School. So that actually was a really interesting kind of point of connection. And then to meet you and to see that, that being a pivotal part of your journey as well, actually really, really interesting. So although that was just a accidental kind of almost similar name comedy connection with Joel, the important thing there was the Think program. So the Think program is absolutely fantastic. Really was a kind of pivotal point in my life, kind of professional life, but also personal life, I would say. And it was the place at which 2 things happened for me. One was I saw coaching and I saw everything that it could possibly offer and how, well, probably not everything it could offer, but just like the scale of what it could offer. And where I saw facilitation, and we'll talk a lot about this, I'm sure, where I saw facilitation as a job. So up until that point, it was the kind of thing, I've been running workshops all my professional life as a consultant, but it was kind of around the edges of the work in inverted commas. And what I sort of think, which is an entirely facilitated program, everything that they do is delivered in the form of workshops. That was the point at which I looked at what was going on there and thought, this is a thing and it has great value. And secondly, that's the thing I want to be doing. I want to be doing that and not the other bits of my work.
Yeah, so interesting, kind of pivotal moment. And yeah, for listeners who don't know or haven't listened back to that conversation that I had with Joel, my memory is that for Joel, Think has been a big part of his career because it's where he kind of got to coach a lot of people, people, not you, but people like you, and learned a lot about the craft there, and they probably similarly saw the impact of it. And yeah, you've pointed to it. Joel was my coach, and his company has been very fundamental to me, but especially because I've been in the last year, since we've known each other, I've been really in the process of publishing the 12-minute method books, which all started in a coaching conversation with Joel. And when I think about like, how do I know that coaching can make an enormous difference in people's lives? Well, I look at the impact of, I think in the end, we did 3 coaching engagements, Joel and I, where he was my coach, and each of them contained multitudes of impactful moments. So it's nice to kind of notice that. And I guess being 2 British men with similar names, similar letters in the thing, that's quite funny that you got confused. It's not just my fault. And so it's interesting though, like we'll come back to think and come back to that moment where you saw those 2 things, but you said that, but to give listeners an idea, what had you been doing before that? What took you to the program? And also you'd done some coach training already, so you weren't new to the idea of coaching in that way.
Yeah. So my background, in a nutshell, is consulting. So I had an interesting start to my professional career, but not interesting enough to tell you about it here. But effectively, at some point, I fell into almost consulting around change. So helping organizations to navigate the change. Normally, this was change that was being driven by technology. I think that has been the case for such a lot of time. So I spent a little bit of time at PA Consulting, where I learned a lot actually about just how organizations navigate large technology change. I met some brilliant people there and learned kind of how to run consulting engagements. And as a part of that, anybody who's been a consultant or seen consultants at work knows that effectively what they're doing is having conversations and coaching people more or less formally through a process. So for many of those big firms, the process is all wrapped around putting in place some big technology. So I had done that for some time, and I had been picking up the skills of coaching, I think probably just by watching other people and not really knowing what they were doing, but seeing how that person is doing a really brilliant job. I think some of those people actually were coaches, even though I didn't know it, but I would be seeing them in the work of interacting with their clients. So I did that over some time. And then I took an unexpected but brilliant detour into digital marketing, where I set up an internal management consulting practice. So it was facing towards our clients, helping them to change their businesses to adapt to the great new websites, apps, etc., that the digital company was providing for them. So set that up. What was super interesting about that was understanding, once I was inside a marketing company, effectively understanding the power of communication and stories to help people change. So from the consulting side, you're thinking about almost how do you hold people's hands to get them to change. In advertising and marketing, you're thinking, how do I tell stories that inspire people to change? So both really, really important parts of how change happens in the world. So it was a great insight. And while I was doing that in the world of advertising, I felt like I really needed to learn something. So it was that moment in time I was thinking, well, what am I going to do to build my own knowledge? So interestingly, actually, in the consulting world, they put a lot of effort into training their people. In the advertising world, very little effort is put into training people. So this was very much my own journey. So it was at that point that I searched out a coach training program, and I trained at the AOEC, the Academy of Executive Coaching, which I really, really enjoyed. And I did that around the edges of my job.
And what was it specifically that took you to coaching as the way to develop yourself at that point? Do you remember?
I think it was, honestly, I don't really know now. I can't really turn that back. I think it was a realization that it was a part of the job. It was what I was doing day to day, and that there was a way to learn it and get better. So I think I probably stumbled across someone or read a book that made me think that. And then it was literally, I Googled for courses, and that was the one that came up. And I think actually at that point in time, there was also a kind of government small business grant scheme, which I was able to apply to and got some money as well to go on the course.
Nice. And Yeah, it's interesting that these things you just kind of stumble across them. Roughly when was the coaching training that you did?
2014.
Okay, 2014. And
Yeah.
what do you remember, like, looking back now, because I always think it's interesting to think about the training that we did. And I know that you use coaching in lots of different ways now in your work.
Yep.
What is there that you learned on that program? And I've heard great things about that as well, that program from people who have done it since. What do you remember about that program? What are the things that have stayed with you the most?
I remember probably was the first training course that I went on that didn't have endless slides and have people just sitting looking at PowerPoint and glazing over. So I think back of all of the schooling and training I had done had always been somebody at the front of the room explaining something and then you writing notes. And the form of the AOEC course was a group of people sitting in a circle on chairs, an expert explaining things, demonstrating things, getting people to practice things, and then a lot of reflection. It was a very different mode of training, which I hadn't experienced before, and one that, for my learning style, I believe actually for the vast majority of people, this is the best way to learn. I think there's a lot of science that shows that people learn best by hearing something, doing it themselves, and reflecting on what happened. So this was that in action. Yeah. We could talk lots more about that, but I completely agree. It feels like nothing I read says that we should have more lectures, basically. And so then what in the end took you to, did you use the coaching then before Think? Because you talked about Think as being pivotal in that. Did you use it? I guess you used it whenever we do coaching training, people always use it, right? But did you actively use it, or was it more a kind of passive, became a part of how you were running these consultancy projects? Yeah, so as part of the training, you have to coach and be coached. So of course I coached people as a part of the training. I'd never gone into it thinking that I would take on coaching clients, in a formal sense. I thought that what I would do was use it with my consulting clients as a technique, effectively. So that's what I did. So that was in 2014, and then in 2015 I went to things. So I think probably it sowed the seeds there with the coach training that had me looking around for more. Then through another piece of serendipity, Think presented itself, and I went on that course in 2015, and actually that was the stimulus, plus also so many of the ideas that have formed now into what Curve, my company, is, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So much of that came together in 2015. So this journey, thinking of my coach's journey, or whatever triggered me to look out for that course in 2014, then led me in one way or another to Think in 2015, and then eventually setting up the company a few years later. Yeah, it feels like it. I mean, it feels like change was always part of what you were doing. It feels like then there's this coach training that arrives, a little bit serendipitously or out of curiosity, and then here you are at Think. And I love the thing you said earlier about Think, that it showed you what the scale of what coaching could, what could happen with coaching, the scale. What was that? How did you see that? What happened with coaching on Think for you or for the participants? So the way that Think works, so it is a program where the attendees go on a journey together over these 6 months, where they're together for these 4 weeks. And it is learning delivered in the way that I described just there. So they'll introduce concepts. There's often an inspirational speaker, although they have a very informal way of kind of delivering that content. And then the participants will practice what they've heard. They'll talk about what they're practicing. They might adapt what they're doing, and then they reflect. So that's all happening. So this is the workshop piece, and around the edges, every participant has a coach. So they've been coached all the way through it, and they introduce peer coaching, which is another brilliant technique that I love. So they effectively give some very light coaching skills to all the participants. They buddy people up in pairs. And so every day, more than once, you're sitting down with your peer buddy coach, asking some coaching questions. So you've got, especially in those 4 in-person weeks, it's super intense because you've got the facilitated learning, which is very coachy in nature. You've got peer coaching with your buddies multiple times in the day. And then in the week, you normally would have 1 or 2 actual coaching sessions with your coach. So it's really, really intense. In fact, apart from sleeping, and even then, I wonder whether the coach's voices might be there in the subconscious, but you've really got an awful lot of formal and less formal coaching going on. And what I saw was how that enabled each individual to learn so much more than they would otherwise have learned. The purpose, I think, is to learn. And then interestingly, for me, it was to see how all of those different people being coached by different coaches were on one journey together. So one of my huge passions around coaching is team coaching. So what do you do to take a team, like a whole team, and coach them against a single objective with a pair of coaches? Typically is how we do it. So that was something which it kind of triggered that thought of, I can see now how you could take a team of people with a very big and ambitious goal in an organization that may have the potential for enormous impact in the world. And by using this coaching approach, you can make that success. And you could probably make them achieve way more than they even believe they could do right at the start.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure as we kind of move in a few minutes into Curve and what's happened there, we'll get into how you do that and the impact it's had. But I love the way you're talking about that. The other thing that stood out there when you first mentioned Think, it's one of the 2 or 3 things that you said stand out in it looking back, is that you kind of saw that being a facilitator could be a job. And I love those moments, and like lots of us have them, especially people who do coaching. I've got a client at the moment, and she says she just had this thought. It's like, like she's not the only one I've heard say it. It's like, oh, wait, this is a job, isn't it? Where you just talk, speech marks, just talk to people. You get to have these amazing conversations. That's it. In a way, you saw, it sounds like you had some version of that at Think as well. With you've been running workshops, you said, for most of your career, but there was something different about what you saw at Think. What was that?
It's interesting. You asked about the Academy of Executive Coaching, what was different there, and I hadn't prepared this, but my immediate thought was literally, how were people seated in a room? So
yeah,
they weren't sitting at desks or around a table. It was a circle of chairs.
Well, and that's not a small thing, is it? Like,
absolutely not.
If we talk about workshops later, like it's like one of the fundamental decisions is how are people positioned?
Absolutely not. It's a really, really big thing. So if I wind the clock back to my change world, so a career of helping organizations to change, probably the most noteworthy of those big change programs that I was a part of was in New York, where there was a program to change the way that the police and fire departments operated. It was a program that had been kicked off in the wake of the 9/11 kind of disaster for those organizations. So the impact that trauma, the very real trauma, especially think about fire department, it lost 300 and something people in an organization of 3,000, so like 10% of the staff.
Yeah, and I've got to say that when I went to Ground Zero, it was actually when I started reading the first responders' names. I can feel it a bit now that I got the real emotional reaction. That it was like, it's just, just getting that feeling of those people who were in there.
Absolutely.
At that moment where the second plane comes or the building goes down.
Absolutely. And I find it, it's very hard to talk about it without getting it emotional for me, because I, for years worked with those people who were, literally traumatized and in grief. And at the core of the program were some really important changes to the way those 2 organizations operated, in order that should something similar ever happen again, it wouldn't have the same impact in terms of numbers of lives lost. So, really important. And that change was very difficult to make for all kinds of reasons. Kind of organizations that have got very deep culture, where there's a sense of any change is a bad thing. And interestingly enough, both those organizations, police and fire organizations, are really there to stop change, stop the burning building, stop that they are organizations whose very nature is to keep things as they are. So in a sense, you're kind of pushing against a whole organizational culture to get change to happen. But the way in which I was facilitating workshops then, and there were a huge number of workshops all thinking about requirements and how change was going to happen and how communications would happen. And think about the physicality of it. We were all sitting around big tables looking at PowerPoint decks with bullet points on them. And that's still true of most consulting workshops now, I think. So then wind the clock forward to think, we arrived in the building they then were in, which was in the gasworks in Amsterdam, really amazing Victorian building, entirely open. So no kind of fixed furniture in there at all. There were kind of colourful cubes that you could sit on and some bean bags and tables that moved around. And there was no front of the classroom, if you can imagine that. There was always a facilitator or two running whatever the session was, but they would be constantly moving around. So there was a very, you could really feel the difference. You felt immediately a part of what was going on. There wasn't that kind of hierarchy that you often get with the teacher on at the front, or the lecturer on the podium, or even in the consulting sense, the consultant standing at the PowerPoint where everybody else sits down. So a really big shift in just physically how people were arranged.
Yeah. And that, in a way, so is it like that showed you a different, like a kind of facilitation that just spoke to you more, that was more you, and that was, because I know a bit of the story, right? I know that this thing in some ways sparked Curve, right? And is that one of the things you saw, that it could be different, and a kind of, in a way, that really excited you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that it was way more effective. It was more enjoyable.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's some part of it which is, the two founders, really brilliant men. One had run McKinsey in, I think, the Northern Europe, I forget which bit, but like very, very senior in McKinsey. One had set up and run multiple advertising agencies. So two very well respected, very successful business people were showing that business could be done a different way.
Yeah.
So there was a bit of, okay, this is, and I use this word with caution, serious, because I'm not sure that seriousness necessarily is what we want, but I guess you can take this seriously, is my point.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then what was you think out, it sounds like, because of part of this ongoing curiosity of what was happening, and as a learning experience.
Yep.
What did you hope to get out going into it, and what was the immediate impact, or what happened next?
So similar to the coach training, I went in primarily to learn.
Just because learning was important to you again. It's just like, I just need to be learning something.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I always have that, the kind of area that I'm interested in learning about is this: how do people work together? How do you and I work inside of our heads on ourselves? And then how does that play out in the rest of the world? And how can that all come together so that everybody's improving, getting better, being as good as they possibly can be? And then together, like as teams or organizations, how can they get a picture of what brilliant can be, maybe even more than they could picture to start with, even better? And then how do they go about making that happen? So for me, it was primarily going there to learn. I suspect that there was a little bit of wanting to meet new people. I don't think I would have said that at the time. In retrospect, though, that's 7, 8 years ago now, and I have got some of my very best friends are, my cohort, and we have there are 30 people in each class, and we've got a WhatsApp group which, is still pretty active most weeks, and I'd say probably half of the people who were on the course are still really, really engaged in that. So it's created a very strong community. I don't think that's what I went there for, but it is what I got. And then I the result of it was coming up with an idea for a business for me. And I think I knew that I was ready for a change. I think that was part of, in particular, why I did think at that moment in time. I don't think I knew what that would become. So part of the way that Think works is it asks, or it used to, I believe it may have changed now, but it asks each participant to bring in a concept that they want to work on. So a business idea, a startup idea, that they're really supportive of kind of social impact work. So quite often people would come in with a brilliant idea to make the world better. And I came into it without really knowing what my thing was. And I think the reason for that in retrospect now is because my thing is enabling other people to do great things. So that's my thing. So I went into Think not really having a sense of what I wanted to build in it. But when I came out, I'd seen demonstrated through the program the kind of work that I want to do.
Yeah. And then the business started. Like how soon after that did you start to make that change, make that happen?
Yeah, not immediately. So I was still working at the advertising digital marketing agency when I was on Think. Probably about a year later, I left that agency. At that point, I started actually doing a little bit of one-to-one coaching, just because it was a way to keep my skills in, earn some money.
Yeah. Do you remember like what kinds of people you were working with at that point and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think it was friends of friends,
yeah.
Basically. I think I coached a neighbor, I coached, some other people that were just introduced to me. I didn't go out to find people, they found me. So that was what I was doing at that point. And then I started a business called Dotworks with another thinker, actually, Peter Mandano, absolutely brilliant man, who he and I had this idea for an organization that would help people to connect, really help people to connect. Really, really great idea. And as it turns out, Peter has taken that idea and is writing it up into a PhD thesis right now. So there's some really interesting thinking in there. It didn't land at that moment in time in a kind of saleable business concept. So we got a lot of people who are like, that is fascinating, really, really interesting, but not how do I get it? So we had a super interesting journey. As it turns out, he is the husband of my now business partner, Lizzie. So it turns out that we were, I had the right family, but the wrong person. But it was really, really interesting journey, and we made some fascinating discoveries, and we met some really interesting people. So that did that for a year. At that point in time, Lizzie and I had been talking quite a lot about what we might do together, and I had been talking about Think. Peter Mandano had also been on the Think program, so there's a Think thread there as well. In fact, he's the one who introduced me to them, and Lizzie and I were talking about facilitation, effectively, like how she was the head of innovation for the agency, and through that work, she and I were putting together some really amazing workshops, kinds of things that weren't being done anywhere else, I think, in the industry at that time. So we wanted to get to a point where we could distill what we were doing. People were saying, oh, that's brilliant, Lizzie, John, what you're doing, that's absolutely brilliant. But it always took us to do it. So what she and I wanted to do was to find a way to train other people to do what we do. So that's where Curve started. Effectively, the nub of it is brilliantly facilitated workshops are a great way to have new ideas and to help people to change. And the best way for that to scale is for more people to know how to do it. So Lizzie and I created what has become basically the foundation of Curve, which was the workshop, how to design and run a great workshop. And probably a year after that, so we're almost 5 years old today, I think, Curve, we set up Curve with the single product, how to deliver workshops.
Yeah, and I know that some of that, that foundation in some way leads to the book later on and that kind of thing, when other things in the world, happen and have an influence. But how then did the business build? Because I know that that's not the only thing you do now. And what happened as that developed? And I guess, the other question that's of course fine is like, what were you and Lizzie doing? And how did you start to translate that?
So at the heart, as I say, was the workshop. I mean, we had found a way that we could, in the form of a workshop, teach people how to workshop. So, quite meta, really, this workshop on workshopping. And we built it into a form that was kind of repeatable.
And were you running it for the public, or were you running it in companies? Like, where did it? Because I imagine this became a saleable business idea, not just a thing that people said this is so great, like the other project, but actually one that people were buying. So was it for was it B2C or B2B or both?
It was both. So we put it up on Eventbrite, and occasionally we still do that now. So just to get people to come along and experience it. So we do have open versions, but the largest number were being run inside of organizations. So typically the kinds of organizations that want this are service businesses. They're the kinds of businesses that put their people in front of their clients. And this is a really important skill, is that they can show up really well and they can get the results. So lots of consultancies, lots of agencies, those are the kinds of organizations, some brand organizations as well, but less so. So we started doing that, and we would, it's a half-day format. At that point in time, it was all in person. So we were doing half-day workshops, and we were doing them sometimes with kind of open enrollment, could be anybody coming along, but more often it was teams of people or people from the same organization. While we were doing that, we were also taking on kind of specific design and run me a workshop to achieve, insert what needed to be achieved. So we need a new strategy, we want to come up with a new vision, we want to understand our roadmap. These were the kinds of briefs that Lizzie and I would get to actually come in and facilitate. And now this is Curve. If you wind on to today, we're still in the same place. We enable people to do things for themselves, and then we come in and do it with them.
Yeah, in a way, it's like it's a more complex and more fleshed out version of a business model that a lot of people see, right? By being the workshop people, there will be some people who come to that workshop who think, actually, we've got a really serious thing here that I want more help with. And the people I'll think of course, is John and Lizzie. Yeah. And did it at that time, or maybe now, if you think about there's those two things you do: enabling people to run really great workshops, and then actually running these workshops that are, in a way, more like, we want to achieve this and we want the expertise of John or of Curve to do that. Does one of those kind of excite you or get you in that place of that place of excitement or energy that more than the other?
Yeah. So the essence of Curve. So when Lizzie and I created Curve, we have this one phrase. I mean, it's not our slogan or strapline, but we call it our essence. It really is the foundation of everything we do. And the phrase is, we are enough. And what we mean by that is that we, you and me as individuals, and everybody listening, like we're enough in ourselves to do whatever we need to do. That we, as teams of people, we're enough. As organizations, as society, like, we are enough. We have what we need. So it's very much a kind of coaching idea in there. And that all that's required is kind of joining the dots or closing the circle in a Gestalt sense, that to enable people to achieve what they're capable of. So the reason I say that is because, for me, the really exciting thing is everybody is enough. So for me, it's the enabling other people. So I love to go in. I love doing great workshops with people. I've just come away from doing a 2-day retreat for a leadership team of a huge organization. That's absolutely brilliant, and I loved it. And more exciting to me is enabling millions of people to do that for themselves. That, for me, that's the exciting bit.
Okay.
If I could train everybody in the world to run workshops, I would, because I think it's just an absolutely fundamental skill that everybody could benefit from.
Yeah, and in a minute, I want to ask you about that, because we've got some people listening, and we can kind of help them probably in this moment, right, with their next workshops. But a couple of times you've talked about what matters to you. So being the enabler, that kind of learning that you saw at Think and AOEC and that took place in the workshops, and now this thing, it's quite powerful when you say that, and you say, if I could enable everyone, millions of people to do this, I absolutely would, and I can feel the energy of that. Why is that so important to you?
That's a super question. I think it's so important because people get stuck, right in your territory now here, like people get stuck, teams of people get stuck. And when they're stuck, they aren't as happy. They don't achieve what they want to. I genuinely see people who waste weeks, months, years of their lives. So I think it's the ability to solve problems and to come up with ideas. And if you think about, the state of the world right now, like, what do we need? We need people who can solve problems and come up with new ideas. Like, this is the response to all of these huge challenges that we face. We need to solve problems and we need to have great ideas. And I know that through the facilitation, the ability to bring people together to do that as a group, that's a super skill that the more people that have it, the better.
Yeah, and there's a really, that reminds me, a really nice phrase on the Curve website, that the biggest barrier to success is often not resources, right? It's the people for an organization, but I think what you're saying is for the world, right? It's that, like, and I really believe this, like you're pointing to the book, the reason those books have made it up my priority list, like the reason they matter to me is exactly the same thing. It's like there's these people who are stuck in all kinds of ways, and that can feel like hell. And that's, to change that is an amazing thing to do. And like, one of the things that I am most confident will, like, I don't know how to solve any of the big problems in the world. I have no idea. And what I feel like I've seen as I've looked at that and tried to learn about it is that a lot of the things we try and do sometimes make things worse. So it's really hard to know what to do facing problems in the world. But right, like, if you can facilitate connection between different people to creatively solve problems, or if you can get people out of the creative hell so that they're finally doing that thing that they really care about, like, those feel like undeniably good and likely to create good things. And the thing on the website says, the biggest barrier to success is people. It's their anxieties and, the relationships and the things that hold them back and stop them. Absolutely. I get that. Yeah.
And so, to just thinking about the workshops, one of the beautiful things about workshops is how people feel. So typically people will come out of it feeling a way that they don't generally at work. So that's one good thing. The other thing, which I think people, they can't quite imagine it until they see it happen, is that you break this relationship between input, time, effort, and output or outcome. So in the business as usual, people will like work harder, work longer, grind through for hours and days and weeks and years, and the solution may happen in literally minutes in a workshop setting. So you've got this ability to break free from this kind of input driven world, which people find counterintuitive. They often can't imagine it till it happens. But then when it does happen, it's like, wow, why did we not do that?
Yeah.
Years ago.
Yeah, you're so right. There's this, I'm not sure if we've ever talked about it before, or if I've talked about it on the podcast actually, but I wrote an article about it a couple of years ago. I heard I guess he's a kind of, I don't know what he'd call himself, a culture hacker or philosopher or something, a guy called Jordan Hall. And I heard him talking at the start of COVID about, I think the two Greek words for time, or two Greek words to do with time, chronos and kairos.
Mhm.
And Chronos is essentially business as usual.
Yeah.
And certain things can happen in business as usual, like you can you can fine tune things.
Yeah.
And then you get times of Kairos, which is where exactly what you're describing, where actually an enormous amount of change can happen in a short way, and at a short space of time. And he was talking about that, the pandemic being that, because I don't think there's any denying that an enormous amount of change has happened in the last 2 years or so. And I'm sure we're gonna talk a bit more about that, but yeah, it is that. It's such a great point. And I think the same is true of coaching. And I think that's where those two things, that's why the fact that you work in coaching and the workshops, it's why it makes total sense, because really it's about creating in some ways those really amazing changes in much less time than people would expect them to be able to be made. And like you say, with a really different feeling to them as well. I think that's kind of an often underrated thing. And in workshops, a feeling of, I imagine, connection, but also possibility and progress and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're right to point to that connection between the coaching and facilitation. But for me, they're the same. In many ways, it's the same approaches applied to a different form. It's one of the reasons why I imagine lots of your listeners will be coaches and also facilitators. And for any of them that are coaches and not yet facilitators, I would say look into it, because I think the skill set you have as a coach puts you in a brilliant position to be able to facilitate. And I think for some people, they see some kind of barrier, or maybe they feel like they can't do it. I believe that's just a feeling. I really think that the power that coaches have to be able to take groups of people on a journey in the same way that they would take an individual on a journey through their coaching program is huge, really huge. And I think it's something that often coaches I speak to really love the facilitation moments, because one of the aspects of coaching, of course, is one-to-one. And so sometimes, that can be a lonely place to be. And of course, in a workshop, you've got more people, you've got more energy. So I think it's a really great string to a coach's bow, if that's the right metaphor, to be able to facilitate as well.
Yeah, and it kind of happens that often coaches, if you're a coach, you end up getting asked to do that, even if you've never told anyone that you do it. And I think probably one of the reasons that feeling comes up, this is probably has been true for me, is the feeling that, and I think, let's not say there are definitely things to learn about facilitation that are different. And I think it's a bit like this thing that we've been talking about in different ways in this whole conversation, which is there's this kind of impression that running a workshop or facilitating is essentially a lecturing job or a teaching job or a PowerPoint at the front of the room or around a big boardroom table job. Yep. But actually, I think that the way we're talking about it, you're talking about it, when it's done brilliantly, it's essentially, you're right, it's like a coaching job. And there are some extra things to think about and some more difficult things to manage and some different energy things. That's certainly what I find. But yeah, it's like every time, certainly when I'm doing facilitation, every time I wonder what I should be doing, I basically have to remind myself, the answer is almost always come back to coaching, right? It's like every time there's a difficult person or a difficult moment, more than a difficult, that's a nice distinction you're making, in closer apart. It's not necessarily a difficult person, but like when there's a difficult moment, it's usually go back to coaching, go back to listening, go back to asking questions, right?
And I think that's it. There's a foundational skill there that coaches often, they've got some kind of innate capacity or something that they've built up over their lives. They've got training that gives them some great skills in terms of like helping people to kind of navigate their own thoughts and build their own confidence. And then the things that take the skill of a coach into the ability to design and run a great workshop, that's all teachable. So that's why I was so excited with the workshop at the start, and then with the journey to writing Closer Apart, which is about designing and running workshops online. The pieces that allow a great coach to become a great facilitator, they're known things and they can easily be learnt and easily be taught. So it was what would you do to help you and anybody else listening to be able to design an experience? So we see workshops as experiences. So like how do you shape that journey from the point at which somebody arrives to the point at which they leave, and how do you design exercises that mean that they produce what they need to produce? Because that I guess is one thing that differentiates a workshop from a coaching journey, is typically there are required outputs. You're having to create something together. So for somebody reading the book, and we could talk a lot more about the book no doubt, we want to give people the tools that they can use to effectively put together that experience.
Yeah, and maybe you've just said this, but that was one of the questions I was thinking earlier on. So when you came to put together that workshop initially, and maybe what it evolved into, and comes the pandemic and closer apart in a bit, what were the fundamental things? And if someone's listening, give as much or as little as you want, but like if someone's listening, you may have you've said some of them. I think we've pointed at lots of them, but maybe could you boil it down? Like, what are the things that people should most be thinking about, or thinking about learning about, if they want to create great experiences? And let's imagine that most of the listenership has all that grounding that you've already talked about. They have whatever brought them to coaching, which will probably also prepare them well for running a good workshop and facilitation. And they've got the coaching training and they've got the practice there. They know people. Yeah. What are those next building blocks that are most important for people to think about?
Absolutely. Well, one of the really important ones is energy. And with that thought in mind, I am going to stand up because I'm seated right now. Standing will shift my energy. So just give me one moment and I'll move slightly around my room. So what we do in the workshop, in remote workshop, which is the sister product that trains people to design and build really great online workshops. And then all of that is wrapped up into Closer Apart, which is the book about how to design and run brilliant workshops online. So at the heart of it, we've got a workshop planning canvas. So we've created something that enables you to, on one page, encapsulate everything about the workshop. So who's coming, what are they thinking, how are they feeling, how are they behaving, where do you want to get them to, like what's your vision at the end of this, and what are the outputs or outcomes that you want to create. And then it guides you through a process of breaking that down into a certain number of kind of steps or activities. So we've got a foundational tool which enables people to kind of really think into what's this workshop for, and how will we know that it's going to be a success. Very, very often, I think people, when they're planning workshops, literally start with, time it starts, time it ends, and then agenda, like, just putting some things in an order. And that's a great place to start. And you can do so much more if you really get into that thinking. So giving people a tool is really, really helpful. And then in the training and in the book, we help people to understand what that experience design looks like. So thinking about that journey, even from before the workshop, because there's normally a few touch points before people arrive. So how do you communicate with people? Then how do you shape the energy? We've got a number of different tools that you can think about in terms of how you keep an energy journey going well. So we talk about the natural energy curve that we have going through the day. And for a workshop, you want to keep that pretty, you want to keep it fairly smooth. So you don't want any peaks, great big peaks of excitement, but you also don't want massive troughs. So as facilitator, you can inject energizers, you can literally change the way that you speak. So you can slow things down, as I'm doing now. So we give tools that help people to manage the energy of their participants. And then we introduce a number of specific kind of workshop activities. So there's, what could you do for this? What could you do for that? Just, cut and paste activities in there. And then we think about what happens afterwards. So for us and for everybody, I think you want to make sure that when the workshop is over, it affects what happens in the real world, in inverted commas. So this idea that, your workshop is a moment that's different, it feels different, you work differently, you connect differently. As a result of all of that, you get that kairos moment, all of a sudden the magic happens, and it then needs to change something outside of the workshop. So this is where for us, then connecting it back into coaching is so important. So in Curve, what we very often will do is we'll run a workshop, comes up with something, and then we'll coach the team to deliver on that.
Yeah, and let's come back to that. I definitely want to talk about that a little more. In a minute, I want to come to closer apart. Let's just get into it, because it feels like we're talking around it here, and I've got lots of things I want to say and things I want to ask. But before we do that, I wonder, talked about changing the energy, and you just did a beautiful one, right? You're really looking after your energy. You noticed it. You just moved around your room, stood up, and there we go. And you talked about energizers, but with all your experience of running workshops and one-to-one coaching, because I think it's managing the energy of the coach, of the clients in a coaching session is really important too. What are your favorite tools for managing energy, for maybe for yourself, for clients, but particularly in a group situation?
So my personal favorite is walking.
Yeah.
And you know this very well, because I bring it up so very often, and I think I love it because it has such an immediate impact. And also for me and for many people, that walking can also be outside, and it can be in nature. So you're getting multiple things going on at the same time. You have fresh air, you've got the stimulation of the natural world, you've got daylight. So the physical impact of having daylight, even on a cloudy day, is quite noticeable. So for me, that's a huge benefit. So
as an aside, by the way, I just remembered that a woman called Eve Poole once told me that actually the research is that we learn better when we're in motion.
Yeah.
And that feels true to me. So if we're walking, we're more likely to retain the things that we've learned, the insights.
Absolutely. There's a lot of research on that. The bit that I think is most fascinating, because it's not just learning, it's also solving problems. And these two things are related. An explanation which I think is fascinating is that because the physical action of walking necessarily uses both halves of your body. So because of that, your brain is having to make cross connections between the left and the right hemisphere just simply to move. You don't have to think about that. That's happening in your subconscious. But what it's doing is creating kind of active pathways between your left and right brain. And as a result, you're more likely to come up with those ideas, which is why so many people were like, yeah, I had this problem, I've been working on it for a long time, but I took the dog for a walk and all of a sudden, ta-da. Yeah. So we introduce walking a lot into our workshops, partly for the energy, but also partly because it's a great way to come up with ideas and solve problems. And because our focus is really on helping people to run these great workshops remotely, because there are so many benefits to doing workshops online. Some of the things that people forget that they can do is go for a walk. It's absolutely possible. And for many people who are working at home away from the office, that's easier than if they were in the office.
Yeah. So walking. And in a workshop, if you say it's an in-person workshop, is it that you send people off in pairs or groups to walk, or how do you use walking in that kind of situation?
Yeah, it's often in pairs, and it's exactly the same online. Yeah. So we would do it if we were in person, but often for remote workshops, what we'll be doing is we will get to an exercise, we will pair people up, they will call each other, and they will go for a walk together. And we tend to give structure to everything we do. So typically it's not just go for a walk and have a chat. It will be, walk for this number of minutes, answering this question, then, pause, do the next thing. So we know that a little bit of structure really helps people to think. So we try and keep it light and fun, of course, but we also try and make sure that we don't have that, not quite sure what I'm doing, not quite sure how much time I've got. So bringing it back to energy, though, before I go too far down that walking route, walking is one of my favorites, literally moving. So as I've just done, now let's stand up. We've got a whole array of energizers, that involve, from meditation, which I love as a way to create calm, focused energy and kind of smooth out any jagged energy that you might feel in a workshop. So that at one end of the spectrum, we've got kind of mindfulness and breathing exercises, to one of our absolute favorites is called Crazy Eights, and it's literally everyone is jumping up and down, throwing their arms and legs in the air. I think you've experienced this. So really high energy, very quite hilarious activity that has people kind of slightly out of breath and in fits of laughter. So I think there's an unlimited number of ways you can shape energy, and we like to kind of think about where's the level of energy right now, so what's the current level of energy and where do we want it to be, and then you think, okay, well, what's the activity that's going to move us from A to B.
Yeah, and like you said, I really like, there's a few things that you just said that have reminded me of Closer Apart. I really like in there that energy curve that you mentioned already, because you'll want different times of the day, you'll want different kinds of energy. And actually, one of the things you said about sending people away walking, I really like this in Closer Apart, just the reminder to be online even more specific with the instructions, making them as clear and easy to understand as possible, just because this feels true. Like it's just somehow a little bit harder to ask or get that communication across. Let's talk about the book a little bit, at least a little bit. We'll see how we go on. I really enjoyed reading it. There were a few things about it that really stood out. One is, I think, from the very start, and in a minute I want to hear about like where the book came from, I guess, because that's a bit of the story that we haven't quite tied up. So probably the gap in the story, in your story. One of the things that really stands out for me about the book is the sense of possibility in it. And I think I was remembering what I was thinking about this morning is I did we had our baby during COVID, and so we did some antenatal classes online on Zoom. It was in 2020, so it was like the antenatal people weren't really ready for that, and they weren't online facilitators, and they hadn't read Closer Apart. And so one of the things that I just really remember was her basically continuously bemoaning the fact that we were online and how it was basically worse than if we'd been in person. And of course, we didn't know the difference, and it wasn't obvious. What I love about Closer Apart is you seem to really take the view that it can be even better online. And seeing that experience with NCT made me really feel that. It's like, it's really important that we don't have the attitude that the poor floundering, because she was thrown into it like everybody else in 2020. But, if you change that sense of perspective and you think, well, actually, where and how can this online experience or this hybrid experience be even better than an in-person experience? And it feels to me like one of the things I really liked about the book was that you and Lizzie took that attitude, and that makes it really land. And the other couple of kind of high level things I want to say about the book for people who are listening is, for me, it felt like you tried to do something quite ambitious, and you did it, which is that you tried to make a book, this is what it felt like, that would work for a novice. And would work for somebody who has a lot of facilitation experience, and even would work for people who have at least some online facilitation workshop experience. And that means that I imagine it would have different effects for different people, but it really does, like you said about the workshop guide people through the whole process. And a great way to read the book is if you've got a workshop coming up. I think you say that in the book, but it's really true. It would really, it's almost always true about learning, isn't it? That the best time to kind of is to apply it as soon as you possibly can. And I, as someone who'd run, quite a lot of workshops by then and some online, it had two really nice effects. It had an effect of like, phew, I'm getting this mostly right. Like most of this stuff that John and Lizzie are talking about, I am already doing in some way. And it had a lot of fine-tune. The second piece would be the fine-tuning, extra details, little different little things that can take things to a new level. And I can talk about what some of those are, or we can get into more of them. But yeah, there's, for people who are listening, there's my reflection on the book and what it was like to read it for me. Just feel free to just respond to any of that. I guess that's just like a mini monologue, John. So you can also ignore it. But and then I'm interested in, where did the book come from? How did it come about?
Yeah, well, it's brilliant. It's lovely to hear you say that. I mean, I really love, for me, hearing people find the book useful and telling me how they've used it is just exactly what I want to hear. That's
Yeah, and I actually don't think I said, but I meant to say, because I think we saw each other not long afterwards, but I did have a workshop that I was running a couple of weeks ago for a team, and I went back to it, not for the whole process in this time, but because I was like, I know there's a thing about this in the book, and so I am sure that there are people like me who have read it who will continue to reference it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what we want. We want it to be a book that sits on people's shelves that you pick up and you use again and again and again. Look at that!
I'm just showing for people who haven't got video. I'm showing John his book, which does normally sit on these shelves behind me. At the moment, is out in case I want to grab it and ask you questions about it.
Lovely. So, and interesting what you say there about the, great for novices, great for people who know what they're saying. One of the things that we loved about Workshop when we created it for the first time was it could have junior people who'd never run a workshop before come along and learn absolutely loads. And then repeatedly, we would get people who were head of strategy in agencies who'd run thousands of workshops who would come along and go, I really didn't believe that there was more I could learn about workshops. So we want to create something which has, it's got potential for everybody. And the workshop evolved into the remote workshop. So we created this product.
And was that when COVID happened, or was that already happening before that?
Interestingly enough, we had created that for an environmental consultancy who wanted to, as part of their sustainability measures, they wanted to be moving more things online. Ironically, they never actually bought it. So they asked us to create it. They never bought it. It was really good for us because what it did was it meant that we had a product. Little did we know how popular that product was going to become in March of 2020. So we had it up, we had it ready to go. From March of 2020 through to the summer, we were absolutely non-stop training people to facilitate workshops online because all of a sudden the whole world needed to work out how to do that. So we were flat out doing that. And at the same time, I had this idea of writing a book about how to facilitate for a long time, and it had been bubbling around, but never quite got off the ground. But there was something about the urgency at that point in time of like, this is something that everybody needs to know as soon as possible. So we went down a twin track path of creating the book. So what became Closer Apart? How do we take all of this knowledge, which exists in our training courses, and put it into a book that people can learn in their own time at a much lower price point? So we went off down that route. And at the same time, we created it into an online course called Facilitating Workshops Online. So that same idea, the ideas that are at the heart of Closer Apart, Facilitating Workshops Online, and the Remote Workshop, they all cover the same ground. They all give people in different forms the way to learn how to run really great workshops.
Yeah. And so yeah, there's a few things about the book, like practical things that I want to kind of draw out that I was thinking about in preparation for this conversation. But I guess first I'm curious, so the process of creating the book, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot in the last year or five. What was the process like for you, and what were the difficult parts of that, and what will you do differently next time?
Next time, yes.
Wait, why is that funny? Is that funny because they'll never, it was so bad there'll never be a next time, or because you've got the idea bubbling away in your mind?
Absolutely, I do have the next idea in my head. So and I learned.
Can you tell us?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'd love to get into now is team coaching.
Yeah.
So it evolves from the facilitation, but it is there's a lot written on coaching. I mean, there's a huge number of books, as you know, some really, really brilliant books on coaching, and there's very little on. There are books on group coaching, like how you coach people around a single topic, but not too much on the team coaching. And Closer Apart is a book for everyone. I know that's a not a great marketing approach, but what we wanted to create, Lizzie and I, was something that everybody can pick up and everybody can learn from. So it's a facilitator's guide that anybody can use. Lots of coaching books are quite niche, that, you know, they're for specialist practitioners. So I would love the next book to be same mold. So it's a book for the masses, and it's about how do you coach teams of people to achieve what they can't even believe is possible.
Yeah, so nice, exciting.
Watch this space.
Yeah, we might name it. Well, I think we'll pick that. We'll speak about team coaching before the end of this episode. I really want to speak to you about that. But yeah, the book. What lessons, or what was difficult, or what was the process like?
So it was a fascinating process. It in the end took about 10 months. But if I were to look back on it, I think the actual writing time probably happened in, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 days. I mean, it was a very, very inelastic, if that's the right way of describing it. So looking back on it, I learned that there are many, many people who say, here's how to write a book. And what they're saying really is, here's how I write a book. So many, many blogs, all great for inspiration, but it turns out that none of them were the way that I wrote my book. So I had some great assistance. There's a woman called Kate Carruth. She has this company that helps people come up with ideas and get their content out into the world. So she gave me some kind of coaching effectively around how to shape the ideas, and that was really, really useful. So that got me to a point of having Lizzie and I and she together created what she calls an S-curve. So it's a kind of journey of the reader from the start to the finish. So we got to that pretty quickly. And then the work of writing the words, that kind of fell on me. So between Lizzie and I, she took the design, and you'll know that it's very design led book. So it's absolutely beautiful. We wanted to create this feeling of being in a workshop, which is very hard to do in printed form. Yeah. So she took that and has created something which really does that. It inspires you through its design, and it coaches you through its design. And I, meanwhile, went off to try and, you know, get all of our ideas into written form. What it turns out, my method is that I take myself away to the Premier Inn in Bury St Edmunds, which is very comfortable but has very few facilities. I didn't take my phone, and I just stayed in my room and I wrote, and it's on the side of a river. I went out for a number of long walks, dictated, you know, into my phone. So I must have taken my phone, but I didn't switch it on except when I was dictating, and then just wrote. So I think I had 4 weekends, and over the course of those 4 weekends, all of the content was written.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and there are lots of great things in the book, and it's worth saying, like, I love what you said about the design and the feeling, and it's a really practical book. So it's like, you know, to actually read it, it's not that long, but if you to do all the exercises in it and to really do the thinking about the workshop, it's it's kind of open-ended, which I guess is a part of what for the right people will make it really, really, really valuable to have. There's kind of lots of things I could pull out from it. There were loads of little, tidbits I really liked. I think actually it was like a link to the website. There's a really nice, talking of energy, like snacks list, basically. And I was like, oh, this is good. This is great. And again, that was actually a relief, because I was like, oh, that is kind of how I eat when I'm doing these things. But it is interesting to think about it. There were some cool stories in there, John. Like, I love the story about thinking about remote workshops, about sending everybody who's on the workshop, wherever they are in the world, the same thing, the welcome pack, creating some version of we're all in the same thing together here, in that kind of way. I wonder, when you think about what are the things which mostly people don't do with online workshops that kind of would happen in an in-person workshop, what are the things that you can kind of catch and fix? Maybe it's things like get everyone feeling like they're in the same boat in some way. this is a hard, I'm not quite asking this question very well, am I? But it's like, what are the things that happen by default in person that we need to be a bit more conscious and active with when we're online?
Yeah, I think, probably the one that comes to mind most easily is movement. People feel like,
Yeah.
I'm stuck in front of the screen, so I can't move. It's like, well, but you can. Like, if we ask you to stand up, you can stand up. Like, but actually, most people, I don't know whether it's nerves about feeling silly as a facilitator. I think that often comes into it, or it's just a default. Like, people don't do it, and the result of that for millions and millions and millions of people now. I can see you now.
As soon as you're saying it, I'm noticing that I'm kind of slumped a bit, and the effect that has. Yeah.
And people end up at the end of the day, their shoulders are hunched over, their brows are furrowed, they've got a slight headache, they've been staring at the screen. So you've got this thinking about the physicality of the body, the fact that people spend their whole days like locked in eye contact with people, which in a workshop they would never do. They'd be, even in bad workshops, they're around a table, but in a good workshop they'll be sitting on beanbags, or that they'll be moving a lot. So I think there's paying attention to that. I think is probably the first one that would jump out. But I think one thing is when people start the sentence with "it's hard online because," and you mentioned this earlier, I hear it every single day. It's hard online because. Treat that as an invitation to say, well, how might I do that? Typically, it's as easy or easier to do it when people are remote. So, how do you have the right nutrition for each individual person in a workshop, in a room? Like, that's a catering challenge. If people's at home, you just say, make sure you bring the snack of choice, and they do. So I think it's trying to open people's eyes to what is possible, and then approaching that with a "how might I" mindset, as opposed to it's hard because, which is then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's hard to move because we're online. Well, no, it isn't. It's just because you haven't tried.
One of my it's hard online because is John. I'm going to ask you about now, but it was also I have the Coaches Journey community. Some members of that get to, they know who's coming on, and they sometimes send in questions, and one of them was essentially this question. So one of the community members was saying, when he's doing workshops in person or teaching, like, he's able to really read the room, and online that feels harder, and that does feel harder to me. But certainly March 2020, I was working on a leadership program with my friend Joe, and we had to move online at the kind of last minute. So it was, there was a lot of energy there about how do we change this thing that's always been in person into something that works online? What do we need to do? And especially in spring 2020, everyone was super stressed because their whole lives had been turned upside down. So there's lots going on. But I remember us getting to the checkout at the end, speaking in the breaks or when people were in breakouts and being like, what is going on here? Like, we've got no idea how this is going, really. And only at the checkouts at the end of the day, we did around the group, one thing you've taken away from the day, did we, both after that kind of breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. And I'd never realized up to that point how much I was really feeling the room, and just feeling like the level of engagement, the, I don't know, the energy, I guess. So yeah, I'm curious in terms of reading the room, in terms of that being, is that a thing that you find harder online, or have you found a way to kind of mitigate that, or what ways have you found?
I think the answer to that is ask. I mean, the best way to understand how people are is to ask them how they are. So I mean, I absolutely, I get that sense of reading the room. Of course, you can still read. You can read from faces. You may not be right in what you see, but equally you might not be right in the room either. Just remember that.
Well, and you may not be right. You may not be right for everyone as well, right? You may get a kind of majority feeling or a collective feeling, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily catching the 2 or 3 people for whom it's really not working. It might be, but
And you've got. So one thing is ask. So we use a tool called emotional or energy check-in, which is super simple. We just ask people at the start of the workshop, on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your energy right now, or how are you feeling right now? And then just using your fingers, so this is probably where I am at the moment, 7, then you get an immediate sense. And it's interesting how often people don't look like the numbers they put up. It's, it's quite easy online for people to, especially, if they wear makeup, like put on the makeup, and look fine, but not necessarily be fine. So,
well, and vice versa, actually, like sometimes in online workshops, particularly, it's like, someone's online camera angle and the desk, the chair they're sitting in has them kind of looking like they're barely there. And then they tell you at the end of the workshop, oh, this has been an absolutely amazing day for me. Thanks so much. And it's who knows what's going on. But yeah, so, so how often might you do that throughout a half day or a day long workshop?
So one of the lessons of the book is we tend to say don't have any session longer than 2 hours, and for what was a day long workshop, make that into 2 2-hour sessions. So maybe we'd have one morning and afternoon. We typically do a check-in like that at the start of any 2-hour session, so maybe one in the morning, maybe one in the afternoon. One of the things that is really, really great about remote workshops, doing them online, is they don't need to be tied together in one piece of time. So something that people do which works really well, is much easier online, is this would have been a day if we had to get everybody to come together to an office, but actually a better way for us to do it is to have an hour and a half every day in the week, or we're going to do it over 3 weeks and we'll just have it every few days. So you're able, because you don't have the constraint of transport, you're able to break workshops up into smaller pieces, and because of that you're able to have work that happens in between. So it's so much more flexible, so much more malleable to your needs. So just back onto the reading the room though. So you've got this, okay, well, put some exercises in that give you real information back. I would say do that in person as well, because you may be reading the room wrong. And I really like, that idea of the check-in that you were describing. That's a great one, isn't it? So what one word describes how you're feeling right now, or what one word describes what you've learned today. Really good way to get proper data, not just a sense. And then I think there's also the ability online, which is very, very hard in person, to use private messaging. So, I see Robbie's got a big frown on his face. I don't really know what that is. As facilitator, I can send you a private message that nobody else can see. It's just say, hey, how's it going? Is there anything else that you need from me? And then often that will be it'll be the way that can unlock it. So your ability as facilitator in a remote environment has got things which would be very, very hard to do, if possible at all, in the real world.
Yeah. But what I hear, one of the things I hear in that is, again, not that this is right, but it is when I think in person, it does feel a little bit easier for a participant who's struggling in some way to for them, it shouldn't, but I think it does, to subtly ask a question over coffee or something like that. And one of the things I hear there is it's actually probably quite important online as the facilitator, because not everyone is, because likely the facilitator, not always, but often, is more comfortable with the tools and technology, or that's certainly one of practicing with the tools and technology is one of the things you talk about in the book, and I just think that's so important. Always try never to use something for the first time when you've got 30 people there, but there's something about what I just heard. It's like, and actually as a facilitator, if we know the technology and we kind of know that thing is possible that you just said, there's actually maybe a little bit more leadership that we can bring in, especially if people aren't used to working online, which says it's okay to do this private message to check in with people. And it's okay for you to message me to say, I don't understand this thing. And, mostly people do still do that. That's been my experience of running online workshops, but there's kind of leadership that I think we can take, isn't there?
Yeah. Be very explicit. I think the more that you do that, the more that you give people the opportunity to communicate with you in whatever ways work for you. I mean, obviously, don't one watch out, I suppose. In the book, we propose co-facilitation always. I mean, there are so many benefits to having two facilitators in every environment.
Yeah. So is it every environment? Is it? For me, it feels like especially online, but it might be. I think it's probably also everywhere.
Yeah,
is that what you feel?
I think it's everywhere, because you have the ability, we talk about this a lot in the book, there's so many things you do. So you can have one person who's reading the room and one person who's leading exercises. You can have one person who's managing the chat. So that was the point I was making. It's it's very hard to be leading an exercise and managing the chat. So watch out for that one. But if you've got a co-facilitator, then that's a perfect setup. And the same is true in person, but But if you're online and you've got somebody who's managing the breakout rooms and somebody who's dealing with the chat and setting up a poll or whatever it is you're doing, then you as lead facilitator at any moment in time can be fully focused on your participants.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is a thing that's really clear in the book about, one of the things for those who aren't. So I got the feeling that, I'm when you described it, and I know I kind of said this already, when you described who comes to the workshops, I did get that feeling. I get the feeling like, oh yeah, the people reading this book, some of them are going to be like someone who's just been dropped into running loads of workshops and has never run an online workshop, and that's great. And also everybody up the tree of kind of experience in different ways. But what's nice about the book for people who have run a lot of workshops and stayed away from online because it feels intimidating, what's great about it is there's some really practical stuff like that, which I experienced with the company I mentioned, where we were thrown online in March 2020. We had somebody there, and it is an absolute luxury to have somebody there who's doing all the Zoom breakout managing. It's just like, and the times when that isn't the case, it's a really different experience and far less smooth. So obviously budget doesn't always allow for 3 or 4 members of a team to be there, but 2 at least does feel like it's an important part of it. John, what, there's so much good stuff in the book, and one of the things I was looking at, I was wondering before this conversation, what are the pages that I've folded down the corners of in the book?
Oh yes,
and that is interesting. There's this, just to give people a flavor of what's in there, there's this great table of when you want to, it's like what kind of exercises you can have when you want to, and then lots of different things, make decisions, come up with ideas, search for to find the kind of exercises, and what are your favorites, like crazy eights, like you said. So that's folded down. I love the ways of working piece. That was one of the things I was thinking about with some workshops I was running recently, because I'd read the book. It's like, actually is better phrase than ground rules in lots of ways. And I really like that. There's a really nice piece, for me, about, I guess, how to avoid disruptions or manage disruptions in a session. And, you could speak to that, or you could speak to, like, what for you, if people of those kind of more practical tips, are there any that we haven't mentioned that you're in that book you just think are like, that's the one that I would really want people to take away, or that's the one that for me is the most impactful, or something like that?
I think one I'd really love to just kind of underline is how to create equal share of voice. So we talk about it in a number of different places through the book, so there are a number of ways that you can achieve that. And the reason it's so important is because it's the foundation for a brilliant outcome. So I don't know if you've read the book Social Physics by Alex Pentland, really great book. And in it, he talks about, how research shows that the predictor of a successful outcome of a meeting, he's talking about meetings, but the same goes for workshops, the single predictor of successful outcomes is equal share of voice. So it doesn't matter what you're talking about, if everybody more or less speaks for the same proportion of time, then you'll get to a great outcome. And that's just not the case in the majority of meetings, and
almost none.
Yeah.
Probably none.
Very, very few. And yet it's simple actually to do. So we give a number of tools that you can use that are how you design exercises, how you kind of either timing playback from exercises, or getting people to speak on behalf of one another. So they're not presenting their own ideas, they're presenting somebody else's. Typically then they're much more likely to stick to time, kind of passing the talking stick, as it were, around people. So lots of tools that help you as facilitator to ensure that you get equal share of voice. And not only is it good in terms of the outcomes, it's also, of course, more inclusive. It means that those people who might feel like their voices aren't as important as others, and maybe there's real power dynamics going on, but you as facilitator, you can create in the boundaries of your workshop, you can create an equal environment where everybody's contribution is genuinely possible and heard, and together all of those ideas and contributions come up with your solution or your great idea.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly which bits always are creating the kind of kairos, the real magic, but I would have thought that if if business as usual involves certain power dynamics, and one of the things you do in a workshop is you create the space for a much more equal share of voice, then that's probably, in some ways, coaching, facilitation is exactly the same as we've been talking about. It's like creating unusual conditions that aren't run of the mill, everyday, daily grind conditions. And one of them, going into equal share of voice. Yeah, I love it. We had actually can't remember. So I had a couple of guests earlier in the year. One who, do you know about the thinking environment and Nancy Klein's work? Have you ever come across that? So they have some, I can't remember if Anne Hathaway was the guest, and I talked about the group thinking environment stuff specifically, but that's some very structured equal share. And another guest talking about listening circles, and which is kind of the talking stick, timed stuff. It's like when you read people talking about the impact of those kind of things, and when you even if you just slow down and think through the difference between what the differences that equal share of voice can create, especially when we're thinking about what's going on inside people, about their anxieties, about the hidden agendas they might have, about the things they're worrying about. It's surprising when you slow down and think about it, how many of those things get released when everyone knows they'll have a chance to speak, and that actually they'll have a roughly equal share of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the book, what we do is, we just show how it's done. So you mentioned ground rules. If I think about bad workshops, first of all, often they'll start with ground rules. And what I have seen thousands of times is that all humans, I was going to say grown-ups, but kids exactly the same. You put rules up, then for a lot of people, what they want to do is push against those rules or break those rules. So that's why we use the ways of working. It's a much more powerful piece of language. And one of those rules is often equal share of voice, or everybody gets heard, or no bad ideas. I've seen that on 1,000.
It's amazing, isn't it? It comes out, even if it's purely facilitated, asked, coached. I've never heard. I didn't remember that from the book being so explicit. And now you've said it, I'll remember it now. Every time I'm running a ways of working kind of session, but whenever I've asked that question, pretty much by the time, it doesn't usually come out first. But if you're creating with a group that set of ways of working, then by the end, almost always, it comes out in some way, doesn't it? People know, I guess. They know intuitively that it's really important that voices get heard and that people aren't stifled.
Yeah, and then help them to do it. So it's one thing to say it as facilitator. What you're able to do is to make it happen. So it's with the best will in the world, people in the flow of a workshop aren't thinking about that all of the time, but we as designers and facilitators of those experiences can make sure that it happens. So that's the beauty, is that kind of, I like to think of it as almost like kind of orchestrating and designing. Like we have the ability to enable those people to get what they want. They can say what they want on the flip chart, but then they might not know how to get it, but we can give it.
Yeah, lovely. I want to talk a little bit in a minute about Curve and how you're working with organizations now, and that we talked about team coaching and that kind of thing. But I wonder first, if you've been delivering workshops for large, famous organizations. It's funny, actually, I was thinking, John, you've got a really good, it's very you're like, everyone only needs like 4 organizations to list in their bio, right? That is like, because you always just list like the 4 best ones, like 4 most interesting ones that capture something like that. But your 4 are really good. The 4 in the bio that you said, I think, was NYPD, Coca-Cola, the UN, and Comic Relief. And it's funny, that's all that stuff. Somebody's asked me the other day, why have I not come across any coaches who have told me every coach I come across has told me that they coach for 20 years or more. And I'm, why is that? Where are the new coaches? Like, well, the new coaches don't lead with, I've been coaching for 3 months, because that's not like the thing. And it's like, it's a bit like that. But actually, I'm going to ask a slightly different question to what I was going to ask. Those big organizations, maybe there isn't, but is there something, you've worked with some really big organizations and ones which have big missions in different ways and huge reach. What's meaningful for you about the work with those kinds of organizations?
For me, It is about the scale of impact. So, the ability for those organizations to shape the world. So we do a lot of work with Accenture, like enormous three-quarters of a million people. That's big. So it's literally touching, but through the work that organization does, it's touching billions of people. Really inspiring. We work with HSBC, like millions of customers, even in this country. We work with Coca-Cola, like billions of customers. And let's pick up on that one in particular, because we've been talking with them about their sustainability mission. And I think it's really interesting because a company like that, which gets lots of bad press around its sustainability impact because of the billions of plastic bottles, and yet at the same time, that flipped on its head is the impact. So if they can come good on their commitment to kind of eradicate plastic from their supply chain in, I think it is 6 years now, like if that can be done, if they can truly galvanize their leadership around making that happen, that will change the world. Like, there is no doubt about it, that will change the world. So for me, it's seeing those organizations and seeing the individual people who make up those leadership teams, who at the end of the day have the levers which can change the world. Yeah. And that's the excitement for me.
Yeah, absolutely. The question I was going to ask before is, you've been doing workshops with these kind of companies and others, and you've done it through the pandemic. What do you see in the future for, you talked about the advantages of online workshops in some situations and what's been great about them. And I love it, like the splitting the workshop across several days, giving chance for reflection and learning between, the power of that kind of thing is obvious. What do you see as the likely next phase as the pandemic is gradually coming towards an end and, everything's changed for us all? What do you think will happen next?
I think that collaborating online is like it's not the future, it's today. Some organizations are good at it, some have yet to get good at it, and I think the ones that can't work it out, they're just not going to be successful. I think there's a lot of conversation about this, supposedly, kind of back to normal, back to the office. My prediction would be, 5 years from now, like, very few organizations will have big offices, because what's happening really is a flow of people away from that kind of environment. Realization that to come together, to collaborate, to workshop is, as we say in Closer Apart, it's easier, better, faster, cheaper. It's also more inclusive. There's so many reasons why you would do that. And if that's the case, then why would you go about what I see happening right now, is people spending a lot of money building kind of tiny coffin-like boxes inside of their offices so that people can work as though they were at home, but having schlepped across a noisy, dirty, expensive city to get there. So I think we're going to see the forward-thinking people get really, really good at that, and they are going to be so far ahead of their competition that they will leave those other people behind. And I think that will just, those organizations, they'll lose talent, they'll lose product advantage because they won't be having the good ideas, they'll lose customers, and at the end of the day, they'll lose. That I think is what we're going to see happening. And then I think what's really interesting is, we've got, if you think about what's possible today in terms of getting people together to collaborate and co-create online or be coached online, we're working in 2D, the technology will evolve. I mean, who knows what Zoom will be able to do in a year, but things are going to become possible. So yeah, I'm super excited.
Yeah, and there's a sense of possibility for it, isn't there? Yeah. What will be possible, especially for those forward-thinking people. I guess in some ways this links to what I want to talk about. I'm going to use it as a segue anyway. But with all that in mind, and with all that in mind, I want to hear a bit about how you, but also I know, important as part of that is your company, work with teams, with organizations now. And, part of that is coaching. We've talked about that. Part of it is workshops. We've talked about that. I imagine there are other parts of it. What have you, give us some idea of like, what's the transformational work that you do?
Yeah. So where we're working with teams on a goal that they have. So
good. That's the distinction, I guess. We talked about the access for millions.
Yeah.
Right. We've talked a lot about that in the last half hour. So now it's like when you're in the companies, when they're taking you with that objective and they're saying, whether it's Accenture or HSBC or somebody else, what have you found to work for those kinds of projects?
So what we'll do is we'll typically now, what we found to be most effective is a combination of facilitation and coaching. So that's what Curve does. We're facilitators and coaches, and we train facilitation. And when we are brought in to work with clients on a big goal they have, so they don't want to facilitate themselves, they want us to come and do it, we will design a workshop experience, mainly online, but it could involve in person as well, to come up with an idea. So whatever that idea could be, it could be a new vision for the organization, it could be a new strategy, it could be a new way of engaging with customers. And the workshop will create that. And then we will put a team coaching engagement that supports that. So typically we've got one or some workshops, and then we have a team coaching engagement. What team coaching means when Curve delivers it is an opening kind of goal setting workshop. So these typically are 90-minute online sessions for the whole team, in which we would contract. So we would share the goals, we would agree on them collectively. We'll talk about the coaching aspect. So what does confidentiality, all of that contracting that you would do normally with an individual, but we do it with the group. Then our typical team coaching is 6 sessions. So we've got that session to start with, where the goals is set, the collective goals. Then each individual in the team has 6 normally 45-minute sessions with a coach. We typically coach teams in pairs. So the 2 coaches will split those people between them. And then over a period of, for us, the sessions are normally every 2 weeks. So typically over a period of 2 or 3 months, then everybody will go through those sessions. We have a midpoint kind of check-in, just how are we going, reflection, and then we have a whole group end reflection session. So it's a journey where each individual is being coached by their coach in pursuit of a collective goal. And we've got some collective reflection sessions as well. And it's just an extremely powerful way to ensure that that team gets what it wants, because every single person will have their part to play, and it will be different because they're different.
Yeah. And just because you mentioned it, how do you hold the confidentiality? So it sounds like, is this right, that the 2 coaches probably run the workshop, the reflection workshops at the start, the middle, and the end, and they're coaching half the people. Yep. So how do you hold confidentiality in a situation like that?
Yes. So this is where I believe the power of team coaching comes in beyond individual coaching. So confidentiality in a team coaching engagement is around the team. So what that means in practice is that anything that anybody says in a coaching session, in theory, the coach could share with anybody else. And so some people at the start think, oh, that sounds a little bit scary or risky. The reality is, of course, you don't share everything because it's practically impossible. The power in it, though, is that when people share with their coach in a way that feels like they're sharing with the whole team, it can unlock blockages. It can feel like they've made progress, and that feeling, that shift in feeling can just change the way that the team works. So what that means in practice for the coaches is, we're doing our one-to-one sessions with each of our coaches, and then every 2 weeks, the 2 coaches get together and they share observations and thoughts. So thinking about where there are kind of blockers that are kind of systemic that we could just spot and try and work on, or where there are kind of opportunities that we could see that the team can't see. And because the 2 coaches are doing that, they're able to get a kind of bird's eye view of the team. and help it on its journey. And I have this image, I remember it from school, of like Brownian motion. Do you remember this? It's like a box, but Brownian motion is where all the atoms kind of bounce around against each other, and the energy doesn't come or go, it's just bouncing. But the atoms are going in no particular direction, and there's no progress. And if you imagine those atoms are the people in a team, like any one of those people being coached, you can kind of make them move quicker, give them more energy. But in a sense, it doesn't necessarily mean that the team is going to get anywhere different because they're not aligned. But with team coaching, where you've got a pair of people looking at all of those atoms, it's like, okay, now we can have them vibrating in the same frequency, pointed in the same direction, and that Brownian motion chaos can become like a laser beam and like point in a direction and move really fast.
I think it is really interesting, and it is a kind of it is, I think, a bit of a peculiarity about the coaching industry at the moment. The idea that it could be often that what's happening in coaching interventions in organizations is just speeding up how fast the molecules bounce against the walls. They just bounce against the walls each faster, and they all feel a bit better while they're doing it. It's had a guest last year, Miles Downey. He was talking about how it's just so important. He explicitly calls it business coaching, because it's about the coaching that he does, because it's about helping the business, especially because he's working in businesses and they're paying. He said he did say, you have to think, what's the job? And I can hear really clearly that in this, like, what's the job that we're here, me at the coach and you, the client in this organization, are here to do, and it's not going to be, it might be just about you, but probably it's a big part about the organization. I really hear that one of the things you do in those, in these team coaching engagements, is really get clear, like, what's the job that we as a team are here to do. And then when we split out and we do the one-on-one coaching, it's really clear, like, look, the job we're here to do is your part in how we create this change for the organization. And I think it's both. Often as a coach, it's quite lovely, but it's as soon as you zoom out in the way that you've just done, or like I say, Miles did, it does feel a little strange that almost always in the coaching I do in organizations, I say, is there anything? Do you want to put any restrictions, any restrictions on? And the companies don't do that. And that then means that for the human that I'm working with, that's a great place to be. But it's not so obvious that it's the right thing for the company. I think that's
and it's a missed opportunity. I think there's some part of it which is I like what Miles is saying there, but like, it's a discipline that's evolving. Like it's starting to take shape, I think, built on the foundations of coaching, but with a bigger objective in mind. So I think it's just a little bit nascent as a practice, and I think the more and more organizations that do it, and as people move around between organizations, as we talk about it more on podcasts like this, and maybe when I write my book about it at some point soon, I think it'll just start to be a more accepted and more embraced discipline. So I think we know that it works. I can see the outcomes. It's a very, kind of think right back to where we started in this conversation with my kind of consulting history. Like, I have seen organizations try to make a change and spend millions of pounds on consultants to get PowerPoints that don't affect change, because change does not happen through PowerPoint. Change happens through the behavior of individual people. So you could take a tiny fraction of the millions spent on those PowerPoints and direct it on directly working with that team of people on a business goal. As Miles says, I think that's a really nice way of saying it. This isn't coaching for coaching's sake. Like, we know where we want to get as a team, and that is the surest way I have found to guarantee that success.
Yeah, it sounds so clear. Like that if I was a leader in a big organization, the way you talk about that does sound so clear. And it's like, well, who wouldn't want that, essentially? I guess, is there any, if you're thinking and looking at the processes you go through and the people you work with, and are there any other things? So it's like, it's interesting, there's the workshops, the check-in, the 45-minute sessions fortnightly. What else have you learned that helps makes that real change happen?
I think it is a kind of realization or allowing people to be whole people in inverted commas. I think especially for senior people in organizations, the idea that there's a work life and a non-work life is just a fiction, really. It's just life, and you can't help but be thinking about your work when you're walking the dog, or there's just no, even if we forget about the technology part of it, that's just not how people's minds are wired. So and accepting that as whole people, addressing whatever it is that is going on for people in their lives is a part of them achieving the business goal. So in the coaching sessions, we're thinking, well, what do you need in order to be able to hit this? And sometimes that's work related. Sometimes that's, I would say more often than not, there's something about energy in there. There's something about, how do I have the energy I need to be able to do this? And one of the really interesting areas for me is emotional intelligence. We did a great piece of research with Professor Jochen Menges at Zurich University back in 2020 into how leaders feel and what they needed at that point of leading organizations through that extremely turbulent time. And a lot of what they needed was effectively emotional support for them, and to be able to give it to others. So we came up with some really, really great findings on that, and we're about to kick off a second piece of research with them actually very shortly. So what I think is leaders need, that partly is provided by coaching, it gives the space for it and allows it, is to ask themselves, how do I need to feel? So this is at the heart of emotional intelligence. How do I need to be able to feel to do the job I need to do? And what do I do to feel that way? Yeah. So to add, often the content of work, business related coaching can feel very practical, and it can feel very rational. And the way in which those rational things happen is by human beings with real levels of energy and emotion doing something to feel the way they need to feel. So I think it's a very long-winded answer, but I think it's a piece that is often overlooked. It's seen as being not important, but I would say it's central. Like, that's the thing. The rational work stuff is a consequence of it.
Yeah, no, I love it. And it kind of, but and you kind of said that it's perhaps particularly important for those senior people. It's it's still, I think it's not commonly accepted, all those things. Probably the reason that it's all what you just talked about is so important is because it is not run of the mill in organizations. I don't know if you'd agree with that, because I think you're in these, especially the big organizations, more than I am. But and so I guess that you strike me as someone, I don't know if you feel like this, but you don't have a kind of corporate feel to you, John. That would be one of my reflections. And I don't know if that's a good thing or not. And you obviously worked in a lot of big organizations over many, many years. So I guess what I'm interested in is, like, you're probably often bringing into, I don't want to do too much judging from the outside, because I'm not in conversations with HSBC leadership teams on a regular basis or anything like that. But it feels like you're probably bringing in unusual things to organizations, especially these kind of big, really large scale ones. And that's one of the things that excites you. Like, what's that like? And when and why do you think you're successful at it?
It's a super, super interesting question. When Lizzie and I founded Curve 5 years ago, we set as an ambition, we want to work with the most senior people in the largest organizations in the world. So 5 years on, tick, that's what we're doing. The most senior people in the largest organizations in the world. And one of the things we said to ourselves, we weren't sure it was going to be possible, was we want to show up as ourselves. So it was an ambition. Again, we didn't know whether it was possible. We sit there with our peers in terms of the kind of work we're doing, are the big brand management consultancy firms who will turn up with their shiny shoes and the cufflinks and all of that, the trappings of being those kinds of organizations, very formal organizations. So that was something we wanted. We knew that it would have a positive impact if people could feel that we turn up as ourselves, so they could turn up as themselves. And just to give it you'll smile at this because I know that one of your things is like, what should I wear?
Yeah. So for people who don't know, like a big neurosis that I've had to work on over many years is like feeling anxious about what I wear. I think there's a chapter in my second book called I Am What I Am, if people want to check that out, or you probably find it. It's one of the 12-minute articles. That was like one of the big moments for me. But yeah, absolutely, exactly right.
Completely. And it's a great illustration. So what does turning up as us genuinely mean? I don't own a suit anymore. So
did you used to though? You used to own a suit and wear suits to work and that kind of thing?
When I worked at PA Consulting, it was I'm not sure it was a rule, but certainly like it was like an informal rule that you wore suits. So I have this brilliant recollection of one of our first workshops with HSBC, which is probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, going with Lizzie. And, we've got our magic whiteboards. They come in these kind of tubes, and both of us like to cycle. So we, got bike helmets and, backpacks, wearing jeans and kind of turning up into the HSBC Tower at Canary Wharf, this massive glass skyscraper, everybody, very well dressed, and turning up to reception, and the, receptionist saying, "Are you looking for the ATM?" Yes, okay. Politely saying, "You're in the wrong place," because we had turned up as ourselves, and that was not what was expected in that corporate environment. And we've stuck to that. This is who we are. This is how we show up. Because we've built enough trust now, and we get our business through referrals, that's enabled us to sustain the business. And we are hoping through, I talk about the academic partnerships we have. Obviously, that brings a credibility as well as real knowledge, but it brings credibility. And the more we do what we do, the more I think we are hopefully enabling everybody to show up as themselves.
Yeah. When you showed up as yourself to HSBC Tower, did you have your facilitation belt on you?
I did.
Tell people about one of the things I did, John, is I texted a few people that we both know and said, what should I ask about? And one of them Lawrence did say, ask about the belt. And I was like, yes, I would have forgotten to ask about the belt if you hadn't said that. So tell listeners, I can see it. Anyone, we will put this video on YouTube, but tell listeners about the belt and where it came from and what it means.
Screenshot it and put it on the show note, maybe, so people can actually see it. They're listening, because the impact won't be there unless you can see this. So the facilitation belt, it is actually an adaptation of a shotgun cartridge belt. So people that go hunting, they have this and they put their shotgun cartridges in, and I have had it adapted. A really great friend and former colleague of mine, Alan Davies, who was the Chief Strategy Officer at Digitas LBI, he imagined it, went and bought it, and adapted it to be the thing that holds my Sharpies. So when I'm running in-person workshops, and I just take it out of my bag because I was doing that this week, I wear this belt to basically to ensure that I don't lose all my different colors of Sharpies when I'm drawing up on the big magic whiteboard panels. It's practical, obviously, but it's also a piece of theatre. And I think that, back to what we say in Closer Apart, and we talked about this about workshop, we genuinely believe that workshops are experiences. So it's not just time in your calendar with agenda points on a bullet list. It's a thought through experience. And I liken this to, Disney. I've never actually been, but I have a sense of what going to Disneyland would be like. because they have thought so carefully about that experience. Like every single thing will have been considered. And so we do the same thing. So in our in-person workshops, there'll be a moment at which I take out the belt and put it on. And typically, because nobody else in the world has one of these, people will laugh, it breaks the ice, it's kind of humorous. But the other thing it does is it kind of signals in a very gentle way, okay, time to work.
Yeah.
It's a moment at which we shift gears in the workshop. So it's one of my favorite belongings, and it performs a number of functions in workshops.
Yeah, nice. And I think it's just worth that thing you said about the experience and the theatrical nature of it. One of the things that's in the book, and you've said it, I've heard you say it separately as well, which really reminds me of theatre, really, which is a part of my history, is, don't tell, and basically tell people as little as possible about what you're doing in the workshops to give you total freedom to change it as you go.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily give them all the timings. Don't tell them exactly how you're going to run the exercise, because you might get to a point later in the thing. And, and I remember this from being in plays, like if you skip a whole scene, even if you skip a whole scene, the audience only know that's a problem if it is vital to the plot and if everybody collapses at that point. But if everyone is just smooth, they'll never know that you've run things out of order or missed a whole bit out. And that feels, that I had just got that echo of that in what you just said. I just want to rewind a little bit, because it's like there's a thing that you're doing, John, which you and Lizzie set out to do, right? Which is work with the most senior people in the biggest organizations in the world. And you kind of gave you really skimmed over how that happened, and we don't have to go into it in detail because we're almost at time. But I just want to ask, like, because you're now coaching these teams, right, at the highest level in business, essentially, as far as I can tell. So how did you get in those rooms?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think there's a part of it which is, we're really confident that what we do works. I think there's something about the absolute confidence that what we're going to do will really help and the result will be what they want. So I think that really helps us to go in and project that, okay, we feel comfortable. And then we, both of us, I think one thing that ties Lizzie and me together, and we think very differently, actually. We've got very different kind of mind wiring. And I think that is a huge benefit for us. Like we really do see things very differently. But one thing that's very in common between both of us is we're huge connectors of people, and we're very generous with our connectivity. So we're always, especially Lizzie, she's absolutely fantastic at spotting people who need to talk to each other. And so what we did at the early part of the business was we had lots and lots of conversations, and we were in those conversations. We weren't selling, we weren't trying to sell, we were trying to solve people's problems by putting them in touch. And the result of those connections was that business came in. So it was really, I can talk about this now as though we had a strategy for it. It isn't actually that way round. We did it and it had great results. So that's how we started, which was, genuinely trying to help people, because that's what we want to do. And by proving that help, we made a name for ourselves. And then from there, now, we've got a network of people who refer us. And through things like writing Closer Apart, we've also, and doing research and getting into Harvard Business Review and all of the things now that give us public profile, now people come to us.
Yeah, you may not have set out to do it, but I think now, and I think I see this, I think this is essentially how I built my coaching business, exactly the same set of things that you just talked about, right? Which is make connections, help people, at some point, grow the belief that what you're doing really works. And then in the end, if you do all those things enough, the referrals come and then the profile comes. And so I think that actually, although you were talking about it in this particular environment, it's actually something that pretty much anyone could use anywhere.
True.
Yeah, John, you've been so generous with your time, and we've covered so much ground in this conversation. There are probably lots more questions I could ask. I'm curious now that we started. We kind of got there right at the end of the conversation, but I'm curious about those rooms at the top of HSBC's tower and that kind of thing. And there's lots more places we could go. But before we finish, I just want to ask you, really, is there anything that you haven't shared in this conversation that you'd like, that it feels important in this moment to talk about, that you'd like to share, with people who might be listening? Yeah, what is that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
I really love for people to leave this with a feeling, a sense, and there's a part at the end of Closer Apart where we say anything is possible. And I would love for people to be curious about facilitating, especially facilitating online. If they've not done it, you can, and it can be amazing. And there's just so much benefit that the world could reap if more people could do that. So I think it is like what is it that piques your curiosity, listeners,
Yeah.
when you think anything is possible? And particularly in this sense of like, how do we bring people together to come up with new ideas and solve problems? That's what the world needs. And we, those of us in this virtual room, we're the people who can help.
Yeah, I love it. And like I said, that's a real feeling that I got from the book, from Closer Apart. Of course, feeling that I get from you in lots of ways too, but from Closer Apart, it did feel like it is in some ways that a statement of that. Anything is possible in online facilitation. So, believe and find the ways to do that. Absolutely love it. John, thanks so much for all your time and expertise. Yeah, this has been a total pleasure.
Thank you, Robbie.